Hello and welcome. Today we will be doing a react video to Sam Harris's The Self is an Illusion from the Big Think. I haven't seen this video before. I am very familiar with Sam Harris's arguments on free will. I have read his book. I actually strongly disagree with his arguments, but Sam Harris, the guy, while I am not abundantly familiar with him, he does strike me as someone who has a tremendous amount of intellectual integrity and will often, in order to preserve that integrity, make decisions which I think are financially bad for him because things matter to him and this sort of stuff. And so I respect him as an individual, but I disagree with some of his ideas, specifically on free will. And let's jump into it and see what he thinks and see if the free will argument comes up. And we'll see what he thinks about the self being an illusion, which I think is correct. I also like his argument on free will under certain conditions, but we'll see if we get into that. So let's take a look.
One of the problems we have in discussing consciousness scientifically is that consciousness is irreducibly subjective.
And just a little bit of background, he is a PhD in neuroscience, and neuroscience is kind of his background, where he's coming from, and my background is philosophy, and so they have two different kind of approaches to the problem of free will.
This is a point that many philosophers have made, Thomas Nagel, John Searle, David Chalmers, and while I don't agree with everything they've said about consciousness, I agree with them on this point, that consciousness is what it's like to be you. If there's an experiential, internal, qualitative dimension to any physical system, then that is consciousness. And we can't reduce the experiential side to talk of information processing and neurotransmitters and states of the brain.
So this is a little bit interesting because he is talking about not reducing stuff to, its neurophysiological qualities, which is a bit interesting considering he has a background in neuroscience. But I think he is correct in that the subjective experience is important and maybe not worth completely reducing to, but this is a bit of an interesting take.
In our case, because, and people want to do this. Someone like Francis Crick said famously, "You're nothing but a pack of neurons." And that misses the fact that half of the reality we're talking about is the qualitative experiential side.
And so I think that it's interesting that he kind of leads with this, because I was very much expecting him to lead with kind of the pack of neurons type of thing. I definitely agree that if you're conducting any sort of analysis, to dismiss the experiential side might not necessarily be wrong, as this person he talks about tries to do, but it kind of misses the point, because you're trying to dismiss something that is just, you can't just dismiss it from the human experience, because the human experience is subjective, is, like, it's deeply tied to the human, you can't separate the fact that you are experiencing reality in a particular way and that your filtering system is going to affect all meaning for you. And so I'm a little surprised.
So when you're trying to study human consciousness, for instance, by looking at states of the brain, all you can do is correlate experiential changes with changes in brain states.
So neural coordinates is one of the arguments he uses against free will. He argues that since, you can locate the point at which someone makes a decision, and that decision-making point, like when they decide to move their arm, there's a neural correlate in the brain about the arm moving, and the neural correlate appears before the person is consciously aware of their decision to move their arm. And this is one of the arguments that Sam Harris uses to argue that we don't have free will, because how could we possibly be choosing our actions if our choices, if the decision to make a choice happens in our brain before we're consciously aware of it? And so the idea is we have to be consciously aware of such a thing in order for it to rightly be called as a decision.
But no matter how tight these correlations become, that never gives you license to throw out the first-person experiential side.
So this is, again, interesting. So he's talking about the tightness of these neural correlates, which, of course, is like his purview, his background. But he's also saying you can't toss aside, the experiential type of thing, which I think is correct. But I think that it is correct in it is important to focus on the experiential side, not necessarily it is empirically irresponsible to throw out the experiential side. It's just the meta-narrative of, like, what should I be focusing on, in my opinion, has to include the experiential side.
That'd be analogous to saying that if you just flipped a coin long enough, you would realize it had only one side. And now it's true you can be committed to talking about just one side. You can say that heads being up is just a case of tails being down, but that doesn't actually reduce one side of reality to the other. And to give you a more precise example,
Interesting.
we have very strong third-person, quote, objective measures of things like anxiety and fear at this moment. You bring someone into the lab, they say they're feeling fear, you can scan their brains with fMRI and see that their amygdala.
I think I know where he's going with this, and this is a point that I think often gets lost, is that all empirical research is like based on, the categories of empirical research are based on what's called the operational definition of any sort of concept. And so concepts are often defined in a particular way, and then you find the correlates for this definition. And so, but the fact that we create these categories of stuff like fear or anxiety, we create them on the basis of our own internal experience. And so the very words and concepts themselves are kind of entrenched in an experiential sort of thing. This is quite a bit more abstract than I was expecting, like this entire discussion, but we'll continue.
The response is heightened. You can measure the sweat on their palms and see that there's an increase.
But the idea is the sweat on their palms is correlating with this idea that we've created called anxiety.
Galvanic skin response. You can check their blood cortisol and see that it's spiking. So these now are considered objective third-person measures of fear. But if half the people came into the lab tomorrow and said they were feeling fear and showed none of these signs, and they said they were completely calm when their cortisol spiked and when their palms started to sweat, these objective measures would no longer be reliable measures of fear.
So this is such a cool and interesting point that I think is lost, is that the only reason that these correlates are valuable is because they are correlating to something we have decided, a category of thing we have decided. In this instance, fear. And I'm so happy he's bringing this up, because this is with any sort of like psychology's like big five, like what is it, neuroticism, introversion, extroversion, like I forget the big five, but the point is these are all made up abstract categories that are grounded in sort of operational definitions throughout psychology, and these operational definitions are like a sort of cluster of different sort of indications of a thing. So like confidence, it might be like upright posture is an indication of confidence. A willingness to take risks might be an indication of confidence. And we have this abstract category of confidence that is grounded in all of these experiential things, but it's still a construct. And so what Harris is pointing out is that when the things that are supposed to correlate, like let's say posture up or willingness to take risks, when they no longer correlate with the thing conceptually, the correlates lose all of their value, and it has to have this sort of it has to correctly inform the concept of the underlying concept. And so in this case he's talking about fear, but very excited that he brings this up. I haven't gone through a ton of Sam Harris's stuff, so I'm enjoying this.
So the cash value of a change in physiology is still a change in the first-person conscious side of things, and we're inevitably going to rely on people's subjective reports to understand whether our correlations are accurate. So
this is important to emphasize. The subjective reports of people are informing whether or not the hard science type of thing is even accurate in the first place. And so this very much corresponds with what he talked about at the very beginning, which is you can't toss out the subjective experience.
The hope that we are going to talk about consciousness shorn of any kind of qualitative, internal, experiential language, I think is a false one. So we have to understand both sides.
Let's back that up.
Sides of it. Experiential language. I think any kind of qualitative, internal, experiential language, I think, is a false one. So we have to understand both sides of it, subjective, classically subjective and objective. I'm not arguing.
We have to understand both sides. That sounds reasonable, but also divergent. And it's interesting because he has a background in the neuroscience, it's interesting that he emphasizes more closely the subjective side at the start, because the people who are within his purview probably discount the subjective side and focus more on the objective side, whereas maybe in the field of philosophy, for example, people would be more focused on the subjective side a little bit, or at least relative to a neuroscientist, certainly relative to a neuroscientist, and they might lead this in with a qualifier talking about how the objective measures are important. But of course, Sam Harris leads qualifying, the thing he is used to seeing objected to, which is the subjective.
Arguing that consciousness is a reality beyond science or beyond the brain, or that it floats free of the brain at death. I'm not making any
So this sounds like non-dualist.
spooky claims about its metaphysics.
Spooky claims.
What I am saying, however, is that the self is an illusion. The sense of being an ego.
The self being an illusion, by the way, is a very common sort of narrative in philosophy at large.
Ego, an I, a thinker of thoughts in addition to the thoughts, an experiencer in addition to the experience. That the sense that we all have of riding around inside our heads as a kind of a passenger in the vehicle of the body. That's
also very importantly, Sam Harris has a pretty big background in meditation, and so this comports kind of with his ideas here, in regards to the ego being an illusion, on top of, if you like the greater philosophical research on consciousness seems to indicate that it is a sort of construct, and the word illusion often gets used.
That's where most people start when they
Thomas Metzinger and
think about any of these questions. Most people don't feel identical to their bodies. They feel like they have bodies. They feel like they're inside the body, and most people feel like they're inside their heads. Now, that sense of being a subject, a locus of consciousness inside the head, is an illusion. That is.
So he hasn't talked about free will yet, but he is talking just about the illusory nature.
It makes no neuroanatomical sense. There's no place in the brain for your ego to be hiding. We know that everything you experience, your conscious emotions and thoughts and moods and the impulses that initiate behavior, all of these things are delivered by myriad different processes in the brain that are spread out over the whole of the brain, that they can be independently erupted.
I'm not sure how much detail he'll go into because this is relatively short, but our brain constructs so much of the reality we perceive, and it's not necessarily like a good indication of reality. Like in terms of our perception, what our eyes see is more close to the static on a television screen than what we actually, see like visually in our minds. And what our brain is doing is it's taking this whole mess of chaotic information and interpreting it, but it's doing all these sorts of interpretations on a constant basis to maintain certain sorts of, internal subjective experiences. And Harris is arguing largely that a lot of these are like illusory in nature because, and I'm not sure if he'll make this point, but a lot of people who argue they argue that this illusion is an important characteristic, just for the evolutionary survivability or ability to propagate of any sort of individual, that this illusion is useful, specifically for being able to navigate the world. The belief that you have like this sense of self and this sort of thing, but ultimately it's just illusory.
We have a changing system. We are a process, and there's not one unitary self that's carried through from one moment to the next, unchanging, and yet we.
So this is very classic in philosophy, is like the no man can ever step into the same river twice because it's not the same man, it's not the same river.
Feel that we have this self that's just this kind of center of experience. Now it's possible, I claim, and people have claimed for thousands of years, to lose this feeling, to actually have the center drop out of experience, so that you just, rather than feeling like you're on this side of things looking in, as though you're almost looking over your own shoulder, appropriating experience in each moment, you can just be identical to this sphere of experience that is all of the color and light and feeling and energy of consciousness.
So this is definitely sounding, along the vein of his meditation knowledge and background as well.
But there's no sense of center there. Mm-hmm. So this is classically described as self-transcendence or ego transcendence in spiritual, mystical, New Age, religious literature.
By the way, I think the background is just fascinating in regards to Harris because he is, both coming from a neurology background and also the more Eastern meditation backgrounds, although he doesn't buy in as much to, he buys into the practice more so than a lot of the or a lot of the knowledge that appears alongside it, but specifically the practice of meditation. But he's familiar with the underlying.
In large measure,
stuff.
the baby in the bathwater that religious people are afraid to throw out. It's if you want to take seriously the project of being like Jesus or Buddha or some, whatever your favorite contemplative is, self-transcendence really is at the core of the phenomenology that is described there. And what I'm saying is that it's a real experience. It's clearly an experience that people can have. And while it tells you nothing about the cosmos, it tells you nothing about what happened before the Big Bang.
So again, right here, he's rooted more in the internal experience than like the mystical or some sort of transcendental knowledge as a result of this experience, but just in terms of the experience itself, it seems. Which is, a fantastic synthesis of, his neurology and like meditation backgrounds.
And it tells you nothing about the divine origin of certain books. It doesn't make religious dogmas any more plausible. It does tell you something about...
Notably, Sam Harris is one of the very strong atheists that were popular, in the early 2000s following the September 11th attacks. He was a big part of that movement as well.
The nature of human consciousness. It tells you something about the possibilities of experience, but then again, any experience does. You can. There's just people have extraordinary experiences, and the problem with religion is that people extrapolate from those experiences and make grandiose claims about the nature of the universe. But
so again, he's focused on the experience itself and not any sort of implications drawn on a grander or broader scale, as he just said, which is. Very like his conception is very intellectually coherent, or the way he looks at this. And I was starting this video expecting to disagree with a lot of what he's saying, but I agree with a lot of what he's putting forth right now. I just disagree with his free will argument, but he's not making it. So there's that.
These experiences do entitle you to talk about the nature of human consciousness, and it just so happens that this experience of self-transcendence does link up with what we know about the mind through neuroscience to form a plausible connection between science and classic mysticism, classic spirituality.
Synthesis.
Because if you lose your sense of a unitary self, if you lose your sense that there's a permanent, unchanging center to consciousness, you're...
By the way, the problems of identity are not necessarily always... There's several different problems or ways to model like problems of identity, and they don't all come to the conclusion that the self is illusion, but a lot of them do. That the self is ultimately illusory. But this is, I think, what the evidence seems to indicate, or like what a lot of the philosophical thought is that, the self is illusory, in addition to, like, he's coming from obviously a different background here.
Your experience of the world actually becomes more faithful to the facts. It's not a distortion of the way we think things are at the level of the brain. It's actually it brings your experience into closer register with how we think things are.
All right, so this is on loop, so we'll see.
Johnson, why are you naked?
We'll get that. We'll get Johnson, why are you naked? Tragic. One moment. All right, didn't want to show the ad on there. Damn it, Johnson. But we have Sam Harris on the self being an illusion. It was definitely a short video. Like, he definitely seems to understand a lot of the underlying, ideas and concepts behind the self being an illusion, but it didn't really feel like he necessarily explored them here because, of course, it seems like he is trying to be expedient and also talk about the big picture and also, kind of bring it full circle and talking about like these mystical experiences and these religious experiences in a more secular kind of context, focusing on the subjective experience and his background in neurobiology. And so this was really interesting for me to see. I was hoping for an argument on free will because I think that I want to dissect and react to one of those. So if anybody is familiar with kind of a video under 10 minutes where Harris gives his argument on free will and there's actually, video of Harris talking, please put it in the comments because I'd greatly appreciate it because that is what I want to react to and sort of give my thoughts on his free will argument, which I think has some problems. But overall, Harris the individual, which I do not again, I don't have an abundant sort of familiarity with. He seems to me to have a high level of intellectual integrity, which I think is somewhat rare with the public intellectuals in general, because I think that they often will sacrifice their intellectual integrity for either like expedience or clout or like, reach, like all these types of things. And Harris has definitely made decisions which I think upset his base to some extent when he thinks that it is intellectually important. And so I don't consume a lot of his stuff, so it'd be difficult to say that I'm a fan. But I have consumed, like, I've read his book, I've watched several videos of Sam Harris, and I generally have a positive opinion of him. I, again, think his free will argument's bad, but anyways, these were my thoughts on this. If you have any suggestions in terms of what to react to or this sort of thing, feel free to put them in the comments. Do the YouTube algorithm stuff, like, comment, subscribe. If you like this video, I suppose. If you didn't like this video, well, first of all, you probably shouldn't have watched it to the end. But second of all, what you can do is next time you see one of my videos, click the triple dot and click don't show any more from this viewer or something like this, or not viewer, from this creator, something like this, and you will never see me again. I hope this isn't the case, but this is what you should do as a strategy for curating your YouTube feed. And have a good day.